So our speaker tonight is Brandon Wark. He is the Maine King, the best RV salesman on the Front Range, and a principal libertarian. He is also the founder, not co-founder, right? The founder of Free State Colorado. He's a recurring speaker, and he's a badass dude. So please give it up, Brandon Wark.
Yeah! Well, thank you very much, Josh, for this opportunity, and thank you everyone for being here this evening. Thank you very much. Now, national politics often takes up most of the attention for those of us who pay attention to news and politics in general. Right now, international politics with the G7 stuff and the NATO summit and all that BS. However, I would say what happens in our community, in our state, in our counties, our municipality, in your neighborhood is much more important to how you live your life, to when you're starting a business, raising a family, going to school, just driving on the roads. It all really matters a lot more than what's going on in Washington. So tonight I'm hoping to educate you a little bit. I'm hoping to infuriate you a little bit with some of the stuff the Colorado State Assembly, General Assembly, or State Legislature has done in 2021. It's been pretty egregious, pretty interesting. I definitely had to scale back some of the slides because there's a lot of information out there. So I also hope this motivates some of you to become local liberty activists and kind of pay a little more attention to what's happening locally and make your voice heard. So here's a little general outline of what I'll be speaking about tonight. I'll kind of start with a broad view and then narrow my focus to the specific legislation that we saw this year. So who am I? My introduction. My name is Brandon Wark, Colorado native, world traveler, and as you heard, RV salesman. Before I was selling RVs though, I made my living actually working in the Colorado political scene. For nearly 3 years, that's how I made my living and made my paychecks on it. Started out as a volunteer in 2014 and was hired by a gun rights organization, the National Association for Gun Rights, located here in Colorado, the only no compromise, or one of the only no compromise gun groups, a little bit more hardcore than the NRA. After working for them, I started working in local political races, worked on some state senate, state house, county commissioner, and even a US Senate and governor campaign actually. So I learned a lot firsthand. But more importantly than that, regarding what I'm talking about tonight, I also worked in the state capitol as a legislative aide for the 2017 legislative session. And I gotta tell you, as a libertarian, it was extremely upsetting, horrific, and just a challenge every day not to pull my hair out or just go crazy. But I learned a lot, and I'm hoping to share that knowledge with you tonight. So the reality of politics is not what's presented in school or in the news. Politics is really a power game, where money and control over others is the goal. And basically how politicians do that is through this perceived legitimacy through our state constitution and the acceptance of most people who vote for them. By stealing the wealth of the taxpayers and threatening violence on individuals, the political class uses this perceived legitimacy to force people into a world of their making. Now, like I said, some of what I'm going to be speaking about may upset you regarding some of the legislation we saw passed this year, but I want you to be kind of leaving with a sense of optimism and hope. Because to understand the nature of our society, we need to understand the situation we find ourselves in. We must become aware of how the individuals in our society are using the political process to oppress us and exert an authoritarian agenda over us. So only when we understand the situation can we hope to act intelligently. So I'll basically start with a brief overview of Colorado's political environment. I think it's important to understand the bigger picture and see kind of the context in which this is all taking place. And then I'll shift a little bit more to the state legislature, and then the meat of my talk, the actual legislation that we've seen. So Colorado's political boundaries, clearly we all are familiar with Colorado, but it is one state with many political subdivisions. 64 counties are most commonly known subdivisions. Also, Colorado's 5.9 million people who live here are in a total of 271 municipalities. So those are all political subdivisions. In addition to those 64 counties, we do have 65 state house districts, which is this bottom one here on the right, 35 state senate districts just to the left of that, and 22 district attorney districts as well. I want to mention district attorneys because they are a powerful political force in their own right, basically a state level office. How many people here know who your state representative or state senator is? Anybody? Andy, do you have a question?
Nope. Yeah, just a thought. Do the municipalities have to be deeply contained within a county line?
No, they do not. Many municipalities in Colorado are multi-county. Which is interesting, right? Because if you want to be active in the political sphere, some of these state house, state senate districts, district attorney, they all overlap in the different municipalities, so it creates some interesting issues in terms of elections. We'll get into that a little bit. So the Colorado Constitution is clearly what gives our state government its perceived legitimacy. In 1876 is when it was ratified. July 1st took effect August 1st. August 1st is often known as the Colorado Day, or the holiday in which people who appreciate the state celebrate the founding of our government. Some of the most important highlights of the Constitution I want to talk about are Tabor. Does anybody know what Tabor is? So Tabor is the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. In 1992, a group of activists basically got this on the ballot and got it passed. Just over 111,000 votes is all it took. I mean, that's a pretty thin margin when you think about it. I mean, 1992 is still a lot of people in this state. But it basically restricts the ability of the Colorado government to raise our taxes without going to voter approval. Very, very important. It's model legislation. It's been talked about a lot. It's one of the most best things that's kept us as free and as low tax as we are. This year, the Denver Post says this is the year Tabor died. And you'll see why. You'll see kind of the workarounds that the state government is going through, that all these politicians to kind of work around it and change the terminology to basically not ask for our approval to raise our taxes. Pretty crazy. But yeah, if you guys have any questions or anything, please raise your hand or interrupt throughout. That would be awesome.
Do you have a question?
Yeah.
What do you think caused that? What do you think caused the overturn, and like what angle did they play to overturn that, do you think?
I'll kind of get into that when I get into some of the legislation that we talk about. I'll go through some of that. So Amendment 64, obviously another important part of our state constitution. 2012, Colorado is the first state in the United States to legalize cannabis. Pretty awesome. We've seen some outrageous attacks on our legal cannabis this year, which I'll get into. But pretty awesome stuff. And one of the most interesting things about that is less than 4,400 votes to get it on the ballot. So, I mean, 4,400 votes, that's not very much in 2012, right? So it's a really thin margin, and a lot of politics, if you study economics, you know a lot of it happens on the margin. Same with politics. It doesn't take that many people, just some dedicated people to actually make change happen, and that's part of what I want to get to tonight. Additionally, just over 266,000 votes ratified Amendment 64 to create legal cannabis in Colorado. Pretty awesome. I also want to point out gun ownership, that we've seen that under attack. You know, everybody's familiar with the Second Amendment, of course, the right to keep and bear arms. However, in the Colorado Constitution, Article 2, Section 13, quote, says, "The right of no person to keep and bear arms in defense of his home, person, and property, or in aid of the civil power when thereto legally summoned shall be called in question." So that's pretty cool. I mean, we have a pretty strongly worded segment of the Constitution. Unfortunately, the state Supreme Court does see that as room for infringing on that right. Kind of a bummer. The single subject requirement is also extremely important when we're talking about the legislature. So basically what that means is that no bill, except an appropriation bill, for basically appropriation bill is kind of the general fund bill that they do every year, can have more than one subject. Now there's other ways they get around that too, as we'll kind of see. Some of these bills that they pass this year, sort of one subject, one topic, but there's multiple issues that they address in it. So these are some of the important parts of the Colorado State Constitution. Moving forward into the Colorado Legislature, Article 5 of the Colorado Constitution establishes the legislature. They meet the second Wednesday in January, that's the beginning. So every year, if you're paying attention to Colorado local politics, that second Wednesday in January is an important date. 120 calendar days they are limited to. That's awesome. And there are actually some states in the United States where the legislature meets year-round. So they're constantly plotting tyrannical schemes, 365. We're a little bit better than that. It'd be awesome if they only met once every 10 years. But 120 days isn't the worst, in the country at least. Our government is modeled kind of off the United States federal government. So you see the branches broken up differently, the House, the Senate, the bicameral legislature, all that. So we do have 100 members currently in the state legislature, 35 senators, 65 representatives. Now, of course, this is going to change after the 2020 census. We'll definitely be seeing more seats because the population has grown quite a bit. Each senator represents nearly 144,000 Coloradans, and each representative over 77,000 Coloradans. I mean, it's pretty ridiculous. I'm sure I'm not the only one here who realizes or who thinks that one person can represent all the different interests and diverse opinions of thought of 144,000 people, that is this person that's somehow making decisions over you that represents your community. I mean, it's completely outrageous on its face, but it is interesting to know about. Senators were elected for 4-year terms, and House representatives for 2-year terms. Pretty standard there. And they're each paid $40,242 a year for that 120 days of work, basically. And there's an 8-year term limit, which is very important for term limits. As we'll go into some of the legislation we've seen in this balance of power. So in order to get an idea of kind of why we're in the situation we're in terms of the legislation that we're seeing come across the General Assembly every year to Governor Polis's desk, it's important to understand the balance of power. So as you can see, the State House at the top, State Senate below it, So basically, since 2016, there's been a Democrat supermajority, or majority at least, and by that I merely mean the House, the Senate, and the governor, all the executive branches. I'd like to point out, though, kind of interesting, what got me into politics initially was all these gun grabs after 2013. The unfortunate Sandy Hook incident, and then state legislatures across the country are passing gun control like crazy. So in 2014, actually 2013, Colorado is one of the few states that has a recall process, so we're able to actually recall some of the state senators, enforce the resignation of a few others to shift the balance of power to get Republicans actually to have a majority in the state Senate. So that was kind of cool. They weren't able to necessarily overturn the gun control, but they definitely were able to stop it. So that was right here, and that was really the last time that Republicans have had a majority in the state Senate. State House, it's been getting worse every year that way. If you're interested in having more of a balanced legislature. So currently in 2021, Republicans have 24 seats in the House, Democrats have 41 seats in the House, a huge majority. And as we've seen this year, they've been able to get through pretty much anything they want. In the Senate, there's 15 Republicans and 20 Democrats, so another big majority, but only 3 seats really is what separates the difference there, if you think of that way. Leadership, Leroy Garcia from Pueblo is the Senate president. He's actually good on a few things, which is interesting. And then Alec Garnett, who's absolutely horrible, complete authoritarian tyrant, is the Speaker of the House. So just over a week ago, June 8th, the legislature adjourned. So it might be surprising, right? They convened second Wednesday in January, and now here we are mid-June, and they just convened last week. Well, they changed the rules. They basically changed it so they're not doing 120 consecutive days like they used to. There's 120 working days. So for 6 months, they've basically been able to kind of spread this out. Working day is basically a day that they actually gavel in, convene, and then gavel out. But of course, they're doing stuff when they're not. So yeah, they've been able to kind of keep everything going for a long time now. Another major issue, as I said, in the state legislature is going to be the 2020 redistricting. That's going to happen after the census, so it's going to be a huge shift that way. So definitely some opportunity for people who want to be a little more politically active. So some of the big things, some of the themes we saw this year, as you can imagine, politics is mostly reactive, right? Reacting to a lot of circumstances and the situations we've experienced over the last year. But some of the more interesting things, I got some insider info, is the division within the parties. So basically on the Democrats, Polis was getting lit up. I subscribed to everybody's email. I was getting emails from all these environmental groups, all these hard left Democrats. Call Polis, he's got to support our climate action bill. It's crazy he's not. He's this moderate guy, he's not doing it. And he threatened to veto it because basically it would define total emissions from different industries across Colorado and limit and cap those emissions from those industries. It'd be a centralized control over the economy, basically, over industry. I mean, completely ridiculous. I mean, Polis, as bad as he is, he understands that that would be completely unworkable and completely destroy Colorado's economy. So he threatened to veto it, and the bill ended up dying. The sponsors of that were Faith Winter, Dominic Moreno, and Dominique Jackson, 3 of the worst. On the Republican side in the state house, that's where I used to work, in the state house. So I text one of the current state legislators in the state house. I said, well, what's the skinny? What's been going on this year? What are you guys seeing? He goes, oh, the biggest thing right now is Hugh McKean. Hugh McKean is the House Minority Leader, so he's the highest ranking Republican, basically, in the state house. And basically, these are quotes, direct text message quotes from this legislator who's down in the southern part of Colorado. Hugh McKean's been compromising with Democrats all session. He engages in retaliation against conservatives. He helps the press attack conservatives. He jumps on Democrat bills and pushes other Republicans to provide cover to their agenda too. He was okay spending excess money from the state and federal government for stimulus. So it's pretty interesting. You see it in both parties. You see it in the Libertarian Party. You have a more radical caucus. You have a more pragmatist caucus, right? You have these people who are infighting even among these parties. So it's interesting, and I think it's an important opportunity to realize that there is this division. As powerful as they are, there is some cracks in the armor. Maybe that can be exploited. So kind of interesting. Another big key of the legislative session was the Democrats forced through some stuff that was absolutely and utterly crazy, that's been on their list for a long time. I mean, in years, this has probably been the most extreme agenda we've ever seen. 623 bills were introduced this year, 502 of them were passed. 502 bills were passed through the state legislature this year, this first half of the year. I mean, it's complete. There's changes all across the board to our way of life that I'm going to get into. It's absolutely insane. I like this quote from Bob Rankin. He's one of the senior senators, Republican obviously, but he goes, I think the theme is they did whatever they wanted to do. We're going to live with some bad bills for years to come. I'd like to see some independent thinking from their side of the aisle. But basically they did. They pushed through some stuff that's pretty outrageous. Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce CEO Kelly Rowe, she said that basically it was an exhausting haul for the business community. I mean, they were constantly on the defense, it felt, against the wall, fighting for our members and their employees. I mean, it's been completely ridiculous. So it's pretty interesting too. We'll see Ben Murray from the Independence Institute here has a great article out that just came out this week, basically saying that $617 million tax and fee increases without voter consent, basically violating Tabor and Proposition 117, which passed last November, which basically requires voter consent over these tax and fee increases. But we'll see how they got around it. It's pretty ridiculous. Another quote from Ben Murray there, he said, Colorado lawmakers avoided the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, Tabor, and Proposition 117's voter approval requirements, primarily by increasing revenue through tax policy changes and through government fees. So they didn't necessarily change or add new taxes, they changed the definition of taxes. They changed how taxes are reported. Basically a little sneaky stuff we'll get into here. So I gotta say, we do have some rock star Colorado legislators, we really do. This is the Republican Liberty Caucus. Basically they rate every legislator every year based on individual rights, free markets, and limited government. I mean, pretty good things we probably all agree on. And these are basically the top ones there. Patrick Neville, Sean Chandridge, Dave Williams, Kim Ransom, Kim Van Winkle. I mean, we got some good ones up there, pretty interesting characters, but they are pretty, we'll see some of the bills they've introduced, and they're pretty good on liberty. I think most libertarians would agree with a lot of the stuff they're pushing. And of course, we have the anti-freedom losers there too. A lot of really bad ones. And this list could go on and on. I could have multiple slides with how low rated. I mean, this is like a 3, a 6, a 7. I mean, this is just the worst of the worst. But the vast majority of legislators are complete authoritarian tyrants who want to control every aspect of your lives. All right, so talking about the legislators, let's move into the legislation. So what was introduced, what passed, what failed? Another state rep I used to work with texted me those quotes right there. He goes, pick an issue and it was attacked. There's probably 10 new government agencies after this year. He goes, there was a public option for healthcare, it was too extreme for Obamacare, and climate extremism. Those were some of his quotes of what he told me was going on. I mean, everybody says it was absolutely terrible. So I'll get into some of the details. What I'm gonna talk about is taxes, the COVID-related bills, business regulations. Election integrity is a huge issue that came up in the Republican activist base over the last year, of course, as well as criminal justice and other notable legislation. So looking at taxes, 260 is the big transportation bill. This is one that the Democrats are bragging about. The Aurora Sentinel has this editorial. We should be thanking them, how great they are, what wonderful things they're doing. Basically, this is going to be 14 cents per gallon through 2029 on your tax bill, on your gas bill, every time you go fill up. So it's on average $8 extra every time you fill up your gas. And that's crazy. That's a huge amount of money. Costing the average person about $400 a year. Now, if you drive, like a lot of us do, Colorado's a big commuting area, it's going to cost you more than that. But basically, the whole goal is our crumbling infrastructure. Everybody complains about Colorado's bad roads. We know the roads are bad, so of course, what's their goal? Is to basically raise taxes to get the money to fix it. So we're talking gas, we're talking diesel fuel, we're talking every Uber and Lyft trip now has a fee. Every driver delivering food to your house, every delivery driver, all get fees added on. So you can imagine the prices of things are going to go up, right? It's going to trickle down to the consumer. It's going to continue to spiral out of control, basically. Even electric and hybrid vehicle owners now, $90 a year in registration fees to help pay for this. 30 cents a ride for Uber and Lyft. Online shoppers ordering from Grubhub cost you an extra $0.25. I mean, it doesn't seem like a lot, right? And that's kind of their argument, but it definitely adds up. What's interesting about this bill, too, it's one of their crowning achievements this year, but they actually passed it and listed in there, it doesn't take effect till after the 2022 elections. So they know they're up for re-election 2022, and they don't want to face the wrath of the voters who are now paying all this extra at the gas pump, right? People vote with their wallets more than not. So basically, it was extremely tricky. Hugh McKean, that Republican House Minority Leader, he called it gerrymandering of policy. Basically a trick, so that, people don't feel the pain before the election's up. Pretty crazy. Absolutely crazy. And I'll have all these notes, I'll have everything online on my website so you guys can take a look later. The other big tax bills, 1311 and 1312, pretty crazy. The Tax Fairness for Coloradans package. And this was really the ones, so they are eliminating tax breaks for insurance, oil and gas, and coal, big targets of the Democrats for sure. Basically, that one's bad, and then 1311 is going to roll back to the tax breaks. So, you have a 529 college savings account. Well, guess what? You're limited, you're capped on how much tax break you get for that now. And capital gains, and this is the one where they kind of just redefined how they report it and what they call it basically. So without actually raising taxes, they just shifted how you're reporting it and shifted it's a scam basically to get around it. And of course, it's for the children, the child tax credit. The last one I want to talk about for taxes, it's a huge one, well, one of the last ones at least, is Senate Bill 293. But basically, this is very interesting. So Michael Fields, I don't know if anybody's heard of that. Americans for Prosperity, he was working with them here in Colorado. He has a new group, Colorado Rising Action. He's floating a ballot initiative because he knew that this tax increase was coming up on gasoline. So basically, he has a ballot initiative coming out this year that's going to counteract that and go after that. That's one of it. The other one is he's going after the residential property rate increases. So Amendment B passed this last November, raising everybody who owns a house, your property tax evaluation is going to go higher, you're going to pay a lot more property taxes. So he came out with a bill, or an initiative, 27, to be on the ballot this year, to permanently reduce property taxes. The day after it was challenged by the Supreme Court, it was on a Friday, well that Tuesday, so one of the next working days, the Democrats basically introduced this bill to counteract it. So they kind of got out ahead of it and they said, well, okay, we're going to change the property taxes. We know there's an issue there. We're going to lower it, but it's going to be temporary. And it's basically going to be a lien on the people, basically. So how this works, so starting in 2023 tax year with this bill, continuing indefinitely, the legislation would allow homeowners to defer an increase of more than 4% of their property tax bill up to $10,000 on their primary residence. The balance becomes a lien on the property that's paid back when sold. So you pay less taxes, but then once you sell the house, they collect that tax money. So it's completely and utterly ridiculous. It's definitely assault on our right to own property and going after. Colorado housing prices are crazy. In Denver, the median home price is over $700,000 now. Absolutely insane. So to think that they don't want property taxes lowered, basically. So kind of interesting there. The last one I'd say regarding taxes is the voter transparency and ballot measures. I thought this one was kind of funny. So when there is a ballot initiative that comes up, for people to vote on, you get your blue book in the mail, tells you what that ballot's going to do, or what that initiative's going to do on your ballot. Well, now they say, well, we have to list basically all the services and all the good things that tax does. They want to change. It requires language about the level of public services funded by that. So basically, it's an attack against the taxpayers' bill of rights. Instead of saying it's going to go against your taxes, we'll say, well, it's going to lower your taxes. We need to tell people what that's going to be what that's cutting, And if we're raising taxes, we're going to tell them what that's going to fund. Basically, it's a marketing ploy that the legislators are rigging the game to try and change the ballot language to be more favorable in their opinion. So that is the name of the game of politics, basically. COVID tyranny obviously was one of the biggest issues. We experienced a massive assault on our freedoms over this last year. We can all attest to that, I know. So of course, politics is reactive. It's downstream from culture and what's going on in society. So COVID issues definitely came up. Obviously, vaccine passports was a huge issue. And some of the Republicans actually introduced great bills to restrict the governor's emergency powers and really give polis less opportunity to take advantage of the people. So we'll talk a little bit about those. These are bills that all failed. Won't spend too much time on them, but a good one that failed is that 127 in the top left, but it would basically empower bureaucrats. If there's an emergency, then these state health officials would have all this extra power, be able to pass rules, and just basically become little mini dictators on their own. That one failed, thankfully. 1036 here on the top right, local control of health orders. That one's pretty cool. Basically, it would restrict the county health orders, basically give the local governing body the ability to reject a health order coming from up higher. That's pretty cool. That's a great idea. It's not going to pass, of course. And then Senate Bill 5 in the bottom left corner there, basically allowing some businesses to open under the COVID restrictions, so providing more exemptions, basically just trying to give businesses a better opportunity to stand up and stay open. The other one I thought was really interesting was the one on the bottom right from Representative Luck, Stephanie Luck down in southern Colorado, but basically allowing local government to restrict those state disaster options, just like the top one. So pretty cool. There's some good legislation that could pass if the right people in their legislature. We've seen this. There's been dozens of states across the country where the legislators come out and come against the governor and taking away a lot of their emergency powers that they've abused over the last year. So they tried here, but with that majority from the Democrats, it's not going to happen. A couple of the others, interesting one, tax credits for non-government education costs, restricting emergency orders again, restricting the governor's ability to implement disaster declaration, and allowing off-label use of approved drugs. So there's some solutions, there's some different things that are being pushed to try and open up the state a little bit more and push back against the governor. They all failed, of course. A big one that failed, one of the biggest ones I think of the year was House Bill 1191, which would have banned vaccine passports in Colorado. Awesome bill, it would have been great if it passed. Didn't happen. Those 8 representatives right there basically killed it in the House Committee on Health and Insurance. But what they do is they postpone it indefinitely. So if you have the majority on that committee, you vote. I make a motion to postpone this bill indefinitely. And the ayes have it, the bill's basically dead. That's how you kill a bill, you postpone it indefinitely. It's just the terminology they use. The one bill that passed that I thought was kind of interesting related to the COVID scam last year was extending limits on debt collection actions. So basically the one bill that they could get through was allowing people to not pay their bills. Kind of funny. Moving on to business regulations. Clearly, that affects all of us in terms of our ability to make a living, open a business, make some money, and do what we want with our businesses. So some of the ones that failed, I really like this one. 1062 was deregulated animal shares. So like you could sell shares of an animal, of a cow, something like that, and you can deregulate it so it's much more between the producer and the consumer. Kind of a cool bill. That one failed. Another similar one passed, which is actually good. I'll get into. Kind of a stupid one I thought was the open caption requirement that would basically require movie theaters to have closed captioning basically on all their theaters. I mean, this is the level that the state government, these politicians want to get into in our lives, to control what's on the movie theater screen. I mean, it's crazy, right? Absolutely crazy. The bottom left one would allow businesses to operate. I really love the language from Representative Wark. Basically, I'll just read one line of that, but it says, the bill prohibits state government from passing or implementing any law or rule restricting the natural rights of a private sector enterprise. That's pretty cool. You don't see natural rights included in state legislation very often. So I was like, oh, kudos to that guy for trying to do that and push it. Of course, it didn't go anywhere. Another interesting one I think you guys may have heard about, at least not necessarily in Colorado, but nationally, is the consumer right to repair. That's been a big issue recently, right? You can't, how do you fix your phone? How do you fix all these complex electronics? You gotta go to a specific dealer. You can't do it on your own. So of course, the politicians have a solution to that. And that's to require manufacturers to let you fix it and repair it. I don't know how they would do that exactly, but basically that's the point, is to try and get into that level of obstruction into businesses operating where they basically allow you to have access to their plans or their schematics or whatever it is. So kind of interesting. Glad that failed, actually. The right to repair bill. Another one that failed was multiple licenses for liquor stores. Over the last couple of years, Colorado's kind of opened it up where you can buy beer at gas stations and supermarkets, pretty awesome stuff. But of course, the liquor stores haven't been happy with that. So somebody said, well, let's give them the opportunity to open up more stores, give them more licenses. Well, that failed. But it would have been a great idea. 1120 in the top right, licensed private security guards. Thought that one was kind of interesting. There was an unfortunate tragedy here in Denver with that Patriot Prayer rally where the Pinkerton security guard for 9 News shot and killed one of the people at the protest. And of course he was unlicensed in the state of Denver, which does require, but there's no state level licensing requirement for private security guards. So of course that's the government solution, or the political solution, is just let's require licensing for everybody. And if they got our approval, maybe it wouldn't have happened. Kind of silly, right? This one, 176, was really contentious. This was one the Business Chamber of Commerce was really fighting back against, and it's a good thing that failed. But basically, there's protected statuses you have. If you're this or you're that, then you have certain rights, or you can't be discriminated against at business. This would have expanded it to marital status, caregiver status, and broadening the definition of harassment, training, and keeping records. So if this would have passed, everybody who works in the state of Colorado would have had to take some workplace harassment training, there would have been extra record keeping. There would have been more opportunities for harassment to take place, basically, based on how the government's going to report it and report what that means. So, pretty ridiculous. Some of the bills that passed were kind of interesting. Senate Bill 111 to support marijuana and entrepreneurs. Kind of interesting. Basically, if you can prove that you or your family were negatively impacted by the war on drugs, or you earn less than 50% of the state median income, or you come from a community designated as a low economic opportunity zone, you'd have your share of $4 million in loans and grants to open up a marijuana business. Kind of interesting. Kind of almost like a reparations thing for people who are victims of the drug war. In the top right, this one did pass. This is the deregulating meat sales direct to consumers. So that was kind of cool. The governor's actually not too bad on food freedom. He's big on raw milk and hemp seeds and things like that. So there could be some opportunity to move those kind of issues forward. So deregulating meat sales direct to consumers, pretty cool. Bottom left there, local authority for business personal property tax exemption. If anybody's a business owner, personal property tax is a big issue. So allowing local communities to kind of exempt more people would be a great thing, and actually did pass, so that's pretty cool. This one was really interesting, 1102. I didn't even know anything about this until I started researching this, but it prohibits pet stores that are licensed after the bill's effective date from selling cats or dogs. So now in the state of Colorado, pet stores can't sell cats or dogs anymore. Kind of interesting, right? Yeah. Ferrets only, yeah. So kind of interesting. This was a big one. The governor actually just signed this one yesterday. You see on there 614, but basically allowing the 2.9% we pay in state sales tax for these restaurants, bars, catering companies to keep that money through August. They estimate about $45 million in tax money will stay at those businesses. So that's kind of cool, just giving them an exemption, letting them recap some of that money that they definitely cost them during the COVID lockdown mania. So kind of interesting there. This one was interesting too, 1048, retail businesses must accept cash. So the governor signed that. So at some point here, you go to a retail store, they don't accept cash, they're breaking the law. Kind of interesting, right? No Bitcoin only stores, I guess, in Colorado. You gotta pay some cash. Kind of interesting though, you know, because there's some concerns over digital currency, you know, you want the freedom to pay anonymously. Interesting. But that passed here in Colorado. A lot of stuff, isn't it? I mean, it's like,
isn't legal tender laws like already in place for this?
like federally, like some sort of legal tender laws.
Payment for debt.
Oh, it's only dead.
It's legal tender for debt.
This was interesting too. I didn't know in Senate Bill 39, there's a sub-minimum wage employment. So basically, if somebody had some sort of developmental disability, they can work for less than minimum wage. Well, no more. That's going away. You're basically making those jobs illegal here in the state of Colorado now. You have to pay minimum wage or higher.
Even including wait staff? Like waiters and waitresses?
I'm not sure. I think it's a specific.
Was that an exemption,
Are they
Brandon?
developmentally challenged?
What about wait staff?
You know, I don't know. Let's see. Senate Bill 39, basically, so there's a handful of Colorado companies, so no, pay workers with intellectual and developmental disabilities less than the minimum wage. Now they have to raise those workers' pay over the next 4 years to match minimum wage thresholds. So it was a very, very minor type of program.
So that means the mentally challenged won't be able to get jobs.
Correct, yeah.
What about ski resorts?
I don't know. Were they doing that? Were they hiring people who are?
They've always had a minimum wage exemption.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think this applies to them, would be my answer. I don't think this applies to them. I think this is very narrow in its scope. Senate Bill 87, agricultural workers' rights, giving agricultural workers the ability to organize and join unions, strike, receive state minimum wage, overtime pay. There's some gray area there because we do have a lot of undocumented workers in the farm industry here in Colorado. So this one's going to be tough in terms of raising the prices of food and kind of restricting the ability of farmers to make their own agreements with their employees. Kind of interesting. So that's a lot of the business stuff. I mean, this is just a small handful. This is just to give you an idea of the level that the state politicians are trying to go to in order to control our lives. I mean, it's absolutely crazy.